Well, welcome back to Plane Time. I'm gonna just finish off this last little piece of this model. Not the model, but the last little piece of the fuselage construction. And I just wanted to cover off the insertion of the power frame into the model, because I'm not sure yet, but I think there might have been a problem with the previous video. So I'm just going to talk about that briefly before I go on to show you how we sort of finish this piece. So what happened was that I had installed everything from the formers that go along and form basically the structure of the fuselage, and put the sides of the fuselage on, but I hadn't installed the head frame yet, and then I got to the point of realizing that that according to the instructions, I was actually supposed to install the head frame onto the front of this piece before closing the fuselage sides on afterwards. Turned out it wasn't actually a big problem, and I don't know, hopefully if I haven't lost that piece of video then you'll see that, but if I have, then really all that you need to know is that by carefully sliding, after putting the fuselage sides in, by basically carefully sliding the head frame in from the bottom into the two slots where these two arms fit into the fuselage here, and then carefully turning and swinging the head frame around and into the model. These had to be bent out just a touch. I mean, it's nice that also is nice and flexible. And then popping it in, I end up with the head frame and everything inserted perfectly, with these wings sticking out through the two slots. And as you can see, what happens next is that these pieces, the sides of the fuselage, of course they're flat, and this part is round. So I've glued on the sides now. These popped in nice and clean and perfectly into the four slots onto the side of the fuselage through these pieces that were in the sides of the E pieces, and I just glued there. So I glued that part. I glued in where the head frame joins into the piece A, and then the last piece to comment on is these cutouts here. So these cutouts are on piece B, that runs across the end of the top of the fuselage. If you remember from how it comes out of the box, this is a solid piece of balsa with basically some ridged pieces that say, on the plan it says cut out here. Well, the last piece was that A also had a cutout on it, but on the model, on the plans, there's basically three red lines you'll see that basically say cut out this piece, cut out this piece, and cut out this piece. It doesn't say anything about whether or not to cut out that piece in the A. I've decided, based on just sort of best guess, that the only reason for having that cutout piece on the A was it was intended to be cut out, and it seemed to make sense that they should all be cut out at the same time. So I'm assuming that when it said cut out 1, 2, and 3, there should have probably been a fourth line that said cut out A. And the other thing that I did when I made that assumption, and I guess you guys will be able to look ahead because I'm building it as I go, is that worst case, if it turns out that I shouldn't have cut it out, I can always put it back in. So I've kept it, and I have the piece right here, and if it, whoops, this is the one here. If it turns out that I need to put it back, a little bit of glue, balsa is very forgiving. So what's going to happen next is basically I'm just going to bend over those two pieces and glue them into place, and I'll show you that in a second. The funny thing about this is that the plan doesn't say anything about it, but it's clear from looking at some later diagrams that you have to do this at this point. and that is what needs to happen is bend these pieces of fuselage, the E, around the frame, and then glue it down in that bent state. So it's actually going to form a round cover around the front of the fuselage. And if you look at pictures of, well, the pictures of the finished model, or pictures of real Sopwith Pups, you'll see that that's how it looks in the end. So so I'm just going to do that now, glue it in. And just to mention as an aside, that another little detail that the instructions don't really mention is the importance of sanding. And after putting the E's on the side, what I did with a fairly fine sandpaper, it's an 800 grit sandpaper, just sanded briefly on the side. This doesn't have to do very much. I mean, they're very fine components, but just to get the kind of the edge off where these little tags pop through those little holes in the fuselage, so that it actually feels quite smooth. So I did a little bit of sanding there. There'll be some more sanding that comes up, and that's just, I think that's going to help make the model look nicer and fly nicer in the end. But not really mentioned in the instructions, but seems to me a pretty obvious thing that needs to happen. So all I'm going to do is pop just a touch of glue in here. So that will be where the model, where this piece pops around, and then you can see there's a tag that needs to go through there. So I'll put a little bit of glue into the tag hole there, into the slot where the, whoops, too much, that's okay. And some glue there so that will hold. It's also going to actually glue along this kind of spar that was I think if I remember correctly, it was the J's, and then around the front of the head frame piece there. So let me just, I think I'll try and slot that into the slot here first, get that through, and being quite careful to make sure I don't force it, that it actually pops cleanly into the slot and slides in, and then pops around there like that. And here's another little tip that I've discovered from effectively from watching some of the other videos. You can buy these little clothes pegs from craft stores. They're not really clothes pegs. They look like clothes pegs, but they're and I think some people might call them clothes pins, but they're not. They're actually smaller. They're smaller versions of what you might call a traditional clothespin. And they're great for holding things in place like this, and we're going to need several of them to hold the various pieces of these edge against where they need to be glued tightly, to make sure that we've got a nice, clean, smooth fit all the way down. So I'm going to use 3 of them. I think that should be enough to just pop those into place. Just sort of noticing this edge here doesn't quite slide in cleanly. Yeah, that should be good there. Okay, there we go. There we have it. All right. So it's three of these little pegs to hold that one piece into place, and we're going to have to do the same thing on this side too. I won't show you that because it's just the same as this one, but we'll pop the clothes pegs on and then let it sit, and then we'll also have to do the same thing on the bottom side as well. So that will be, this piece will be glued, held down to this side and this side, and then we'll have a nice smooth beginning of the fuselage. So that'll have to dry, and then we'll be putting the top piece and the bottom piece of the fuselage on. Well, I thought I'd show you what I needed to do to get all those pieces to actually line up nicely on the sides, and yeah, quite an arrangement of those pegs. Let's see, how many is it? It's so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pegs in order to push all of the pieces that need to be where they need to be, so that, and this is what we're trying to do here, so that we end up with the edge of the fuselage holding cleanly against every single piece of the side of the fuselage. Now, the alternative, and you guys may find that it works easier, would be to use super glue, because if you use super glue, you can probably hold it in place for long enough for it to tack down, as long as you get it right. That's the part that makes me nervous, because it took me a bunch of messing around to get everything sort of cleanly sort of lined up, and maybe you could do that if you just super glued down, held down each piece first, and then waited till it was sort of tacked in place before you moved on. So maybe that's an alternative, but I think this is going to work out okay. Everything's held in nicely against the frame. I don't see any gaps on the between the internal pieces and the outside of the fuselage. My only problem now is how I can put it down somehow without popping those pegs off, and let it dry for, it'll probably dry overnight. So first I'm just going to pop those pegs off here. It's my little bag of pegs, I'm going to lose them. These are really good, just exactly what you need for all these little holding bits of model together when you're getting things in place. So, but now that it should be dry, I don't think there should be any real issues on the way through. If you notice, I had tried using an elastic band to hold it together, but it was just a little bit too loose. So that's why I went with the pegs. I did try that first. It might have been okay, but honestly, the elastic band would have just held the part around the top, but wouldn't have held this part. So that's what you need as well to make this all work. So look at that. That actually looks pretty nice. So let's have a look. You can see there's a nice curve around the fuselage there, where that piece of balsa curves around, and the only little thing that I haven't quite got right is that one piece here. So let me just have a look at that, and I'll get back to you in a tick. So what I found is that this edge here, there was just a little bit of a gap behind the balsa, and between the balsa and the former, right on the base there. So I've popped a little bit of glue on there and a peg on it, just to hold it, and hopefully that will glue that a little closer. What I'm actually going to do now, in any case, is work on the base, the top. Well, see, that's the bottom. So while that's drying over there, I'm going to work on the top piece here, and put in the pieces that go onto the top of the fuselage, I guess. Let me just check that that's what happens. But so, well, and guess what? So it wants me to glue the bottom piece in. So let me find that. That will be I, capital I, in the balsa sheets. And so I'll pop that out and then have a look at what we need to do here, because there is a little bit of work with cutting out the hatch. What's actually going to happen is there's actually going to be a little hatch on the bottom of the model there, which is where you're going to put the battery for the electronics. So the battery, there'll be a little hatch door that pops open here, and the battery will go in the bottom here. So what needs to happen now when we're putting the piece of wood over the bottom is to build out the hatch. So I'll show you how that works. Okay, so I found part I on the sheet. This is it here. Notice that there's some dotted lines for what I mentioned before for cutting out the hatch, which will be the hatch door that goes on the front. And there's also a dotted line here, and I guess we'll have to see what happens with that, because it's not clear what that's for at this point. But what needs to happen now, and you'll notice that this is one of the just sort of the nice things about how this laser cut models from Dancing Wings come together, is that if I just slot that into the top of the, or it's the bottom of the fuselage there, the little slots with almost just a light touch, pretty much just click nicely into place. It pretty much fits perfectly all the way down to here. And what happens after that is, after that part goes on, then that needs to bend, and that will bend around. And again, it was kind of important that I made sure that the sides bent over, because now this piece actually clicks in perfectly to each one of those side sort of tags on the side. And if I hadn't done the bending, then that wouldn't have happened. So I think that kind of a good indication that we're all on track to where this needs to be. And so what I'll do is I'm going to glue that down, and then basically I think it should work based on just sort of how I'm holding that now, that that if I glue it at this end and then fold it down, that should hold on. Oh, I see what's going on. Okay, so I would say what needs to happen is that you need to glue down to here first, and that's actually, the point is that that's where that bend is in the wood. So that's what that line on the wood is, where the bend happens. Notice it's straight all the way up to there, and then it will bend. So the best way to do it and make sure you get a good clean fit would be to glue up to there and wait for that glue to dry, so you get a nice firm finish there. Then that means when you bend, you're not going to be pushing up the back part at the end. So we'll do that. I'll put the glue on, and I'll basically just glue that one piece